That was the lamest boss fight ever.
Yeah, all I did was hit him twice with my axe and he just died.
Well, to be fair, I did paralyze him with hold person first.
That's right, which is why you were critting for like 50 damage a pop.
And your sneak attack damage was off the charts too.
I'm gonna be honest, after all of that build up to the big bad evil guy, that was kind of a letdown.
You know, now that I think about it, most of our boss fights kind of suck.
Indeed, if only our dungeon master would design boss fights so they weren't so lame and disappointing. I cast shield.
Welcome to the DM Lair. I'm Luke Hart, and I've been a dungeon master since high school. On this channel, I give practical dungeon master advice that you can implement at your game table. Today, we'll be discussing some boss fight mechanics that you can use with almost any boss to make it more fun and exciting for your players. Because the bottom line is that a boss fight should be one of the most exciting parts of the game. It shouldn't be a complete letdown. Now, I'm breaking the topic of boss fight mechanics into two parts. This week, we'll be talking about things you can apply to all boss fights. And next week, I'll discuss mechanics best suited for mid-level and high-level bosses. So, with no further blah blah from the guy with the big mouth, let's get hopping. First, foreshadow the boss. In other words, don't just plop Demogorgon onto the battle map. You gotta allude to that crap. Hint at a nasty creature being behind everything prior to the fight. If it's just a mini boss, foreshadowing during a single adventure is sufficient. But if we're talking about the big bad of the entire campaign, you should be foreshadowing the final confrontation with them over the course of much of the campaign. For instance, in my Sword Coast Guard campaign, the players have been hearing about Lord Paxton, the villain behind all of the trouble in the region, for a couple years. And they've been fighting Lord Paxton's minions and lieutenants the whole time. In fact, I bet they're about sick of hearing Lord Paxton this and Lord Paxton that. By this time, they probably yearn to confront him and kill him. And that anticipation and yearning will make that boss confrontation that much more satisfying for my players. Next, and massively important, is to wear the party out a bit before a boss battle. Dude, like seriously, if your players walk into the boss fight with all of their resources, spells, hit points, special abilities, they're going to go supernova on that boss out of the gate. And you know what? Your boss is gonna drop like a rock. The characters need to be running a little low on resources when they confront a boss. This adds to the challenge. And this is why bosses are usually placed at the end of the dungeon. As your players make their way through the dungeon, they are using resources and ideally having to budget them to make sure they have enough remaining to handle the boss. This is, in fact, the main idea behind the Adventuring Day mechanic discussed in the Dungeon Master's Guide. The idea is that if your players' characters are always at full resources when they confront any given challenge, and they know they can take a long rest after each encounter, they'll be defeating everything with ease. Yes, I know there are some things in the game that are pretty screwed up, and yeah, I'm especially looking at Healing Spirit right about now. However, there are lots of other things that, if ignored, can have dire ramifications for your gameplay. Not wearing your party down a little bit before a boss fight is definitely one of them. Now, real quick, before I move on to tip number 3, I just want to let you know about the D&D 5th edition adventures I publish over on Drive-Thru-RPG. They are all adventures I created and have run in my own games. So if you're looking for some cool adventures to use in your games, or would just like a way to support the channel, you can check them out at a link down in the description. All right, suggestion number 3, fight to win. Come on, it's a boss fight. If you want to go easy on your players, do that with the wussy kobold guards at the front of the dungeon. Sure, let them trick the moronic ogre into fighting his own allies. However, a boss fight should be challenging. It should feel like everything is on the line. Your players should be a little bit worried about not having taken out that life insurance policy for their characters back in the last town. They should feel like, holy crap, this is real. I could die at any moment. Because without struggle and without uncertainty, victory has no flavor. A win that is not earned won't feel like a win for your players. Trust me, they'll have such a better sense of accomplishment and satisfaction if they actually earned a victory over the big bad. Without the threat of death, life loses its color. Now, don't get me wrong. I am not ever talking about Dungeon Master versus player mentality here. I'm talking about giving your players a fun game experience, and there is a huge difference. All right, next. There is nothing quite more boring than a fight that takes place in a big, old, empty room. Wow, so lame. Come on, folks, let's throw some terrain in there. I don't know, a lava flow, a bottomless pit, some stalagmites, a pile of rubble, shoot, a big giant dollhouse, whatever, just don't let it be a big, empty, boring area. Next, let's have that terrain do something interesting, shall we? That lava flow explodes every so often, spraying the characters with some good old molten goodness. That ground shakes at intervals, causing the characters to stumble closer to the bottomless pit. The stalagmites are accompanied by stalactites that randomly drop with a chance to hit the PCs. That pile of rubble explodes like shrapnel, and that dollhouse, well, nothing is more terrifying than a headless Barbie doll. Now, I actually did an entire video about improving combat maps. I'll put a link to it down in the description if you want to check it out. All right, here's an important tip for you. Plan your boss tactics before the fight. This is the boss. Know what he's gonna do. Now, you can't 100% plan for this because you don't know what your players will do, but you could get pretty darn close. For instance, I know that my red dragon is first going to fly up about 90 feet and then breathe fire down on everyone. Then she is going to scoop up a character that looks like a caster, carry them off a ways, and then drop them hundreds of feet into the mouth of a volcano. Then she'll fly back to the group and breathe fire again. Will I probably have to adjust that a little during the actual fight? Of course. But if I have a general idea of tactics, abilities, and spells that I want my boss to use, it's going to make it easier for me to run the battle and that much more interesting for my players. Okay, let's talk about solo boss fights. If you have your players' characters face off against a bad guy all by himself, brace yourself for a quick beatdown and an overall unsatisfying fight. In general, solo monster fights suffer from a whole slew of problems. Action economy is against them in that the players get tons of actions and attacks for every one that the monster gets. The players can focus fire. The monsters can easily lock the monster down. The list goes on. Legendary actions and lair actions do help with this, but they don't alleviate all the problems inherent with solo boss fights. So, for the most part, I try to avoid having solo boss fights. That said, it does tend to work a lot better at lower levels, I've found, say levels 1 to 4, but once you get too much beyond that, your bosses need friends. And what do I mean by friends? So, you want to have a green hag as a boss. Great, that's a classic mini-boss. But that green hag needs some scarecrows on her side, say 2 or 3 of them. And then maybe there's a clutch of crawling claws that she deploys from a wicker basket. Now that boss fight right there is going to split the player's attention among multiple foes, making the green hag much less likely to bite it in the first or second round of combat. But it also makes the combat a whole lot more interesting and exciting for the players as well. You see, tactics become much more important when there are more foes. It's not just a matter of surrounding the green hag and pounding her into oblivion with sword and spell. No, her little pets need to be dealt with too. Now, yes, a natural consequence of giving a boss friends in the fight means you won't be able to use quite so high challenge rating of bosses. That's because you'll obviously need to account for the other creatures when determining the CR for the combat. However, if you really have your heart set on a specific monster for a boss fight, you can always just pull down its hit points and damage output a little bit to adjust for its allies. Let us know down in the comments what tips you have for making the perfect boss fight. Click right here to check out my encounter design playlist, and remember that next week we'll be talking about how to make a perfect high-level boss fight. And until next time, let's play D&D.